So we have the beginnings of an agenda. If you have more topics, feel free to tack them on the end and we'll get to them, time permitting. I was hoping to get an update from DAF on various resources affiliated with yeah, so I think LF captures this for us, Mark. Now, I'm not.
Okay, so you're no longer required to be in here. Okay, perfect, thanks.
Yeah, I haven't tested it, but it looks like that's what it's supposed to do.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Yeah, it is. That's a lot of automatic things. It's automatically recording, good stuff. So beyond that, DAF, is there anything else to say?
Right now, there are two things that I'm chasing down. One is registry.etherproject.org got something messed up in the DNS translation when we shifted. So I'm resetting that today. That should get cleaned up, and that should push images to etherproject.org registry, which will help resolve a bunch of SD core issues. Second is that the AWS Ether organization had been transitioned to LF as of Friday, but now when I look at it, it's not anymore. So I need to figure out what happened there. But as of Friday, it was under the project, and LF had ownership of the organization. And today it doesn't. So I need to figure out what happened.
Okay. And nothing on the wiki yet?
No, nothing on the wiki yet. That's part of the registry.
Okay.
To be swapped.
I'm sorry. So maybe I misunderstood the registry. What registry is that?
Sorry, that's registry.etherproject.org. A lot of our images are pushed there as well as Docker. In particular, we want to start using this for interim updates, whereas released updates go to Docker Hub directly. So kind of put latest and greatest on Ether for community and
so
in the know. But
so you related that to the wiki. So the problem here is the
DNS
same,
resolution.
The DNS resolution.
Yeah, zone records seem to be messed up somehow.
Okay, got it.
Is that an accurate statement then? What I changed the registry DNS resolution?
I hope so.
Okay.
All I can do right now, I don't have the connections I want to have yet. So all I know is that I filed the ticket.
Okay, perfect, thanks. No, I just wanted to make sure that the wording was correct in the document.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so it's that DNS name that is broken. So with respect to the wiki, do you know if the wiki actually exists?
I do not yet.
Okay, all I know is that the DNS doesn't resolve to it, but I didn't know there was other work to set it up. Okay.
Just a question, Daf. So is this related to the issue with the certificate that is expired?
No, the certificate has been reset. It's just I can't see it because effectively you're caching the old site instead of the new site, and the old site isn't mapping correctly. The old IP isn't mapping correctly.
Oh, okay.
Which is
does it have anything to do with the issue with the key that we had yesterday to publish the SD core docs updates?
No, those are two completely different machines.
Okay.
Okay, so with respect to the AWS, that's not affecting anything being up. It's just who's
correct.
Okay.
Yep. All functionality should still be working as designed with AWS 6, except for the domain name stuff.
That effector effect.
Correct.
All right. So proposal for tagging releases.
All right. Yeah. So this is a topic we've been talking about for a bit of time now, and we finally got to work there. Do you want me to share my screen, or do you want to?
Yeah. Why don't you do it instead of me? Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I'll
Let me,
share the
let me,
screen.
let me unshare here just a second.
Okay.
Okay, it's all yours.
Okay. All right, so I'll just share a window. Let me know when and if you can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay. Perfect. So, all right. So this is a proposal that we're making. That we're making towards SD core GitHub repositories, and the proposal is to tag our releases. And in this specification, we outline why this would be important, as well as the how. What is our recommendation is to get that done. It's so the why. I think it's quite simple, but it's worth repeating. So currently, if you want to answer one of the questions that is listed there, it's quite hard. So if you want to know if a given bug has been fixed for a given release, for example, like whatever bug fixed in SD Core 1.3, it is quite hard to figure out the answer to that question. If you want to know when was that 1.3 released, is 1.3 still being maintained, when was the last commit in 1.3, is work already started for 1.4? These type of questions are really hard to get answers to with the current way the code is being packaged. So this is especially true for developers, but also for users if they may be interested in their bugs being fixed as well. So so what we're proposing to do is to leverage Git tags as well as branches, and the concept of GitHub release to get that done. So this is a visual representation of how this is done. So each horizontal line is a branch. And the main idea is that whenever we're ready to release something, we create a new branch called release/1.4.x. And here x is actually x. It's not a placeholder. And in this branch, you would have all your 1.4 code. If there is any bug fixes that has to be done in 1.4, it is done by doing a pull request to that branch. We would use Git tags for tagging those releases. Everything is there. I don't know that it is worth it to go into all the specifics here. I think it's worth maybe saying what this spec is not. This spec doesn't cover the release schedule. So when do we initiate a new release? What is, as a community, like our common agreement as to like, should that be on a schedule, or should that be every time something outside happens? I don't know. This is not the goal of this spec. And it also does not cover anything that is prior or post this process. So everything that is something like a code freeze, that would be before typically, or something that is after, which could be to write marketing material as to what is in this release. This is not covered in this specification. It's really the how we would release in SD Core. So it covers each individual network function, and the main idea is also, I didn't speak to this, but the main idea is that if there was, let's say, a minor change in one network function and a major change in another, you would take the higher of those, and you would always, they will all follow together. So you wouldn't have a AMF 1.2 and a NRF 1.4 in the same Ether release. Go ahead.
I think how do you enforce that across repos?
That's a good question. Right now, it would be more of a convention.
Yeah.
I don't see. Well, there may be a way, but this proposal doesn't include any mechanism to force that would prevent us from making a mistake here. And it's also like you would have multiple releases in each of those repos, but Ether itself, Ether 1.3, would point to the 1.3 version of all of those. So the enforcement would really be at the Ether level, because you could have multiple releases of an AMF for that, but Ether could still point to the same over time. So I don't think there's any enforcement that needs to be made at the project level, but more at the Ether level there you would have to.
So popping up to the Ether level, what would be what would be the concrete entity that would correspond to?
I hear some echo.
Let me try again. So I like the idea that there's this collective Ether release then, but I was wondering concretely that today refers to a Helm chart, which is once removed from the source because that's Helm relative to containers images. So you got the source, which we haven't been tagging consistently. Then you step up once to the containers built from that source, and then to the Helm chart built from the containers.
Yeah, so the Helm charts would point to the specific tags. So here the Helm chart for Ether 1.3 would point to AMF 1.3, NRF 1.3, SMF 1.3, instead of pointing to specific commits. So and as the tag 1.3 evolves for each of those underlying network function, the Ether itself would also evolve. But yeah, that's how the association would be done in the Helm charts.
Thanks.
So I'm getting a little confused because it seems like in this document, or just from the title of this document, sort of the apex tag is for SD core. But in the discussion just now, we're talking about the apex tag being for Ether. Like, let's talk about rock. Is rock also getting tagged in a similar way, or SD-RAN?
Yeah, the focus here is so this all starts at the individual network function. So the focus here is really on the individual SD core network functions. From this discussion, it's clear that there's something lacking related to the Helm charts, and I will add this as a note to add it to the spec to make sure I don't forget. And no, we haven't covered the ROC. Mostly self-serving because we don't work with it. But if this is something that is interesting to the community, we can do it. It also doesn't cover SD-RAN, but it could. There's nothing here. There's nothing here that is network function specific. It's really a process about how to maintain a GitHub repository. So we could. There would be some logical differences a bit because you could have a different release schedule for the RAN as for the core. Like, they don't need to correlate in the same way that each network function inside the core needs to go together. But everything you see here, you could very much apply to the RAN or any
So
other
one way
project.
of thinking about what you have here, which your Helm chart note addresses, is you could think of the apex of this document being the Helm chart for SD core.
Right.
Yeah.
And it would be good to see that fleshed out. I think maybe almost as I don't want to call it a footnote, but as an appendix at the end of this, you could pop up to the Ether level and say these same principles apply to the RAN and applies to the ROC, should you want to apply it.
But there's nothing applying it across all the components.
Well, so that would then be the closest thing we have to that would be an on-ramp release that then is the aggregation of a set of Helm charts.
Right.
But still, you don't necessarily need to kind of have the same release for all the different three components because they are kind of like progressing at different pace. You don't want an SD core release to hold you back from an SD core release.
That's
Yeah.
right.
This is where the whole release process and oversight from the technical steering committee and all that, technical steering team, and all of that comes into play. So effectively, you would have a release process at some point that's basically saying, okay, we're ready to uprev, say it's SD-RAN by itself, or it's all of the projects, all encompassing, and you want to have that as a major release. So that's up to the TST to sort of organize and scope out. And then when it comes time to doing things like, well, how do we ensure that the tag or branches are applied consistently within the individual GitHub repositories? That is also part of a release process. In order to release 1.4, we have the checklist, which includes, did you tag, did you tag, did you tag? and that sort of thing. Now, I didn't want to, jump in and say too much about a release process, but I would like to make sure that we don't confuse the two things just in terms of the logistics of what the tags are and what it looks like from a Git repository perspective.
It's a really good point. Nice to make sure we keep those untangled.
And
And
I want to
and
reiterate
some of
that
Timon's
whatever.
original point,
Sorry.
Ether as a whole, it's in fact technically the case that there isn't one Ether as a whole. There's multiple blueprints of Ether that people then can say blueprint X has this component, this component, this component, and in fact those components could be at different release stages too. But the way I would address this, I don't want this document to blow up. I think it's a really good thing to have. I think addressing the Helm chart at least gets us an apex for the SD core as a whole. And like I said, then we can talk about what it means, and we ought to augment this document more broadly as well.
Yes, and the other part to kind of keep in mind in here, and probably Sean and Woojun can chime in here. For the ROC and SD-RAN, there are several repositories that are kind of like used on both projects. So if we want to kind of follow this kind of same process, the ROC and SD-RAN may go side by side from the release perspective. But again, this, as you mentioned, this document itself will be applicable at the moment. It's generally applicable for all the different projects, but at the moment, I think it's good for what we need for the SD core itself.
So with respect to the core, is there any value in a decoupling? I like the idea that the NFs would be treated kind of in aggregate as well. And if one of them bumps to a minor release number, then they all do. But is there a subdivision between the control and data plane of the core that makes sense?
I mean,
Is
there
UPF
isn't.
pacing it the same way that the rest of the control plane is?
Okay, so I just want to be clear. So I'm not suggesting to follow the same pace for each revision of each. I mean, the point I make here is that at the top level, Ether, if we talk about Ether, let's say 1.4, well, Ether 1.4 in this proposal should mean AMF 1.4, UPF 1.4, SMF 1.4, all of those things. That being said, you could go ahead. So that being said, you can work on the UPF at a different pace than the AMF and the SMF. I mean, part of me also wants to maybe do the opposite of what I suggested here, is to completely get rid of the whole overarching Ether project in the spec and only focus on the network function. So at least there is agreement on this. Yes, I fully understand and agree that each of these individual network functions will be worked independently and at their own pace. What I want to avoid is them having different semantic meaning. And
yeah, I'm sorry, that's what I meant. And just to make sure that I understood you, obviously they each progress at their own pace. But if one of them, I think I heard you say, if one of them bumps from a minor number, and that was the biggest change, they all followed that one just to keep the numbering consistent.
Yeah. So and maybe this is more controversial, and we should revisit this. Yeah, the same version should be used for all network function as well as the overarching Ether project. Is maybe a place where we.
Could you edit that to just replace Ether with SD core in that sense?
Yeah, I would agree with that, and maybe that's a place for a footnote to talk about Ether more broadly later on.
Yeah, I would look for.
Just checking here, Justine, and I'm sorry I didn't get to this earlier, but are you saying that the project version would map to the repo version across the board? If SD core is 1.3, then AMF is going to be 1.3 also.
Yeah. Yes, that's what we're saying.
Okay, so where's the value in that as opposed to having each repo maintain its own version internally?
Well, if you're working on breaking changes, and a past version of the AMF is only compatible with the past version of the NRF or whatever. It makes sense for those two things to have the same version. So AMF 1.3 should be compatible with NRF 1.3.
I agree with that 100%. What I disagree with is if they aren't tied together, whereas only one of them goes up, why does the second one have to go up?
I think
Yeah.
generally speaking, David, I would argue that while they're independent NFs, they're really all tied together. I mean, it's a bit of a misdirection to think of them as completely independent. I really think that's
so the
stretch.
reason I have a problem with this is that implies that anytime anyone changes a version of any one component, they have to change it for all components at the same time. That
Only
means
at the minor version number level.
I'm sorry?
Only at the minor version number level.
Agreed.
The patches can continue
So
independently.
is minor version applicable to functionality across all of SD core project or only within the repository?
Yeah, it's a good question. We haven't clarified this here. So what is your proposal, Daph? Would you?
I just like to see basically 3 levels. Each repo, I like, the major minor patch makes a lot of sense to me. Let's use that for the repo level. So as you're doing a repo, if you change, if you break functionality in a backward compatible manner, then you update that version stream. You update that number. When we build the SD core project, we collate all the versions of all the repos. And if any minor change has been updated in the project minor change has to update, but not all the individual repos.
So does that mean that the overarching like SD core, let's say you look at the SD core Helm charts for SD core 1.3, you would have different versions of each underlying network functions?
Possibly, yes. Now, if you do have a internally consistent backward compatibility breaking issue with 6 different functionalities, then all 6 of those would be upgraded at the same time, obviously, because they are intertwined, they are the same change. But what you end up getting is, number 1, you're changing the version when the developer changes functionality, as opposed to, whenever you would back check it.
Yeah, but that would mean different levels of versioning. So a user would deploy
within the repos, yes, but not within the project. A project level includes all the sub repo, all the repo pieces, the functional pieces. So it's the list of things that make sense for that particular version of the project. The alternative is every time anybody updates a repo, the part of the build process has to go rebuild every piece of functionality independently, and then reset itself, which results in a lot of testing and a lot of overhead.
Well, every time we create a new release, I mean, when's the last time we created a new release, right? So that's something that would have to be done.
Well,
then
you only update things when you build a new release, as opposed to whenever you do a new build. If you've done a backward compatible change, how much has to be rebuilt?
Yeah. So
whether it's in your functionality now.
So let's say you make a change to release AMF 1.4, you create a patch and you release 1.4.2. Here, SD core 1.4 would deploy SD core like the latest from 1.4.
SD core 1.4.117.
Yeah. So I'm understanding. So do you mind if do you mind if you can I think we probably went over time on this topic. So can we actually out together and maybe you please add any comments you have on this place here. So
again,
at least
my
it is
apologies
public.
for bringing this up earlier. If I'm wrong and pretty much any change in the repo requires rebuilding everything else, which I don't think it does, But if it does, then I'm wrong, and everything I say go out the window. But if the theory is that you can update one repo and not change everybody else's, we need to provide that functionality, in my opinion.
This,
yeah.
yeah, this has been a great discussion. I think maybe there's a meeting, we need another meeting scheduled just to focus in on this a little bit more. But sort of a meta comment here, it does seem that we're introducing source versioning, or what we have been doing is almost Helm chart container versioning. And we don't want to lose the Helm chart. The Helm chart versioning could in fact be the aggregate Aether version or SD core version.
That would be my impression.
And therefore, the source could, as David was pointing out, proceed independently. And the Helm chart as a version, and that version is the SD core version, the Apex version. That's an approach. That's kind of the approach we've taken, at least at the.
We can. My only concern is that, let's say SD core 1.3 would be a combination of AMF 4.2.1 and SMF 1.5, and you have a whole complex array of different semantic versioning for each. That's what I wanted to avoid. I wanted 1.3 to mean something across the board.
Right. So you're taking that Apex versioning and trying to and keep everybody in pace down at the per function level.
Yeah. I want it to be simple too for developers and not have to handle like, okay, well, which version is compatible with which? So it's clear for everybody that 1.3 is compatible with 1.3.
I think we've focused in on what the question is, and we just maybe need to hash on that a little bit more.
Yeah. Again, I apologize for not chiming in here earlier, but yeah, let's chat it over. But fundamentally, you've got two things that we're worried about. One is what set of deliverables goes together to create a good product, and what set of sources was used to generate those deliverables. And those are two separate questions, but they kind of tie in, but you can't resolve them the same way precisely in both cases.
I'm grossly oversimplifying here, but this is versioning the source for each individual NF versus versioning
deliverables or artifacts or elements of the product, yeah.
Including Helm chart and container artifacts. And then to Timon's point, there's also beyond SD core.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ideally, you have 6 sub-projects, and you take the right set of 6 versions of SD core and turn it into Ether on-ramp.
Yeah,
6 projects.
This is what makes this a fun project. Okay, let's continue the discussion, but for the sake of time, thank you for that overview and point everyone go take a look at that document. Gabriel, you got the next topic?
Yeah, that's kind of like related to Guilherme's tagging point, right? So I don't have that much historical background about how the tagging was done at the source code level. When going through the different repos, I noticed that AMF does have some kind of like a standard tagging, like B111 or B100 or so on. But there are some other repositories that doesn't necessarily follow the same structure. They have some like dates format. But in this specific case, this is more related to the auxiliary repositories. That's a point that Gislan brought it to the Aether TST through Slack. Since these Aether repositories these auxiliary repositories basically are used in the primary NFs, we have been merging code, but we have not tagged new changes into the code. And of course, when we update the NFs, they are going to bring these subcomponents or these auxiliary components with not necessarily in a proper manner tag. So that's what I was kind of trying to get some insights on how we can proceed about tagging these auxiliary repositories, whether following the same structure as Guilherme's approach for minor, major, minor, and patch to kind of keep moving forward those auxiliary repositories, at least as a dependencies of the NFs. So that's what I wanted to get from the community with some insight.
Does
on
it
how
make
to
sense to
present
kind
this.
of fold, at least discuss this in the general versioning document, and then kind of maybe you were implying that?
Well, they can be separated in the sense that those dependencies can be versioned independently,
Right.
and breaking changes, like end users don't care at the end of the day about the version of their lib, so they can be versioned independently. I would recommend to still use semantic versioning and like the same type of versioning, but not necessarily the same versions specifically.
Exactly. Yeah. No, from that perspective. So one of the things is, again, I don't have much historical background on how was this done before. That's one thing. So if we have some kind of consensus of how to do it, I can start kind of tagging those auxiliary repositories. Yeah, but this partially aligned to the Guilherme's proposal, but at the same time is independent from they don't need to go side by side on the same version in itself.
So methodology is the same, it's just that you don't have to keep in sync.
Exactly.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So, but what is the typical procedure that the Aether project was using to tag these auxiliary repositories?
Well, historically, it was probably very ad hoc.
Okay.
I don't know if AJ or anyone has anything to add to that.
Yeah. AJ is mentioned that he's not going to join today. He had like a
So
long meeting
Sean
and he wasn't feeling well.
Sean or Scott, do you have any insight into historical?
Could you say again, Larry?
I'm just wondering historically what the versioning strategy was for the auxiliary components.
You mean beyond typical Semver?
Well, any recollections, whatever. I just trying to put down a few notes.
So my question is basically like every commit becomes a patch, versioning update, or how was that handled before?
Yeah, I mean, from what I remember before, at least on our own repos, we would have dev versions. And the dev versions, you couldn't necessarily use a dependency, but then you would bump it to a release version by taking the dev version off of it, and then you could then it would get released by the CI/CD system, and you could kind of depend on it. We did, wherever possible, we would try to pin versions on things, whether it was Go programs or Python programs. We would try to pin the versions of dependencies, both the internal and the external ones, so that builds would always be repeatable, because you don't ever want anything depending on latest or master, because then you lose your repeatability when something changes out there, particularly external dependencies. Does that help?
Not much. So let me give you an example. So let's assume that we have what could it be? So let's say MongoDB library, which is an auxiliary repository that we have, right? So this repository is called by other network functions. So when we make an update, basically some change, some modification into this MongoDB library repository, at what point do I need to create a new tag for that repository? Because basically when the dependency update is let's say the dependabot in the primary, in the network function, does a dependency updates, it's going to look into the MongoDB to see there is a new tag, a new version of that, right? At the moment, it is finding that there is new PRs, there is new commits in the MongoDB library, but it is calling not as a typical version, a major, minor, and patch, but it's calling like that dash and some date based on the commit itself. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. At this point, how was the decision, or how every commit means one new tag for the auxiliary repository? Basically, there is a new commit, there is moves from 111 to 112 or so on, or how that process was for the auxiliary repository.
And an auxiliary repository, that's something that is third party, or that is something?
It's part of the project itself, but it doesn't create a Docker image, but it's called by other repositories that do create Docker images, for example.
Yeah. I guess I'm thinking, I mean, remembering back, it was probably a little bit language dependent, in that we did different things in our Python versus our Go. Are you using different languages, or?
No, it's just Go, primary Go.
Primarily Go.
Yeah.
I mean, then I think the standard practices of like Go mod, Go modules were the way we would work. Andy or Sean, do you guys have anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, like on libraries that we were building, we wouldn't do a tag on every commit. There was no automatic way of doing tagging. Really, it would be up to the developer to change the version file to promote a commit to be tagged, and then the CI/CD would recognize there was a change in the version, and it would tag it and release it, and then you can refer to it then in sort of higher level modules as a Go library or Go module using that number. Does that answer your question, Gabriel?
Partially, yeah, partially. But
I think this is entirely it. You do not tag every version, but because you don't use latest, you can only depend on a tagged version. And it's a judgment call as to whether to commit something to not change the version. If you want to depend on it, you're going to have to change the version.
Okay.
And my recommendation here, I mean, Go uses tags with Go mod, so like I would suggest to take the same approach as we've proposed in the for the network function. So for minor and major, create new branches, and for patches, just make the change in the specific branch and tag it when you're ready to release it. So a tag could be after 12 different commits, whatever, and you tag it. And once it is tagged, the underlying the posts that depend on it will will see that there's a new version and will create a PR in your repo.
Yeah. My question was basically in between when to tag when to tag a specific version, whether it's after one commit, multiple commits, or something like that. That's kind of the process that it was not fully clear.
And it kind of depends
before.
How critical is. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, it was really down to the developer's judgment. I mean, sometimes you would be making a change in a unit test, and there's no point tagging that.
Right.
Sometimes you would say there's a functional change, and I need to. It's a bug fix, and I need to get it out, so I will tag it. But I just wanted to take up the point that was made there about manually tagging. The reason we didn't want manually tagging is, it's not you don't get the full history in your GitHub history of who made that tag and when they made it, and that's what the version file allowed us to do. Is it was a versioned artifact in itself, and then the CI was smart enough to pick up on the change in the file and do the tagging for you. So we weren't asking people to go in and manually tag on GitHub.
Okay. So basically what you're saying, every auxiliary repository is going to have a version file that could be used as a reference for the tagging.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, version file drove the tagging.
Okay, cool, thanks.
And I mean, as Guillaume said, the Go is so well integrated with Git. Once you tag Git library, then GitHub makes that available as a Go module. There's
Right.
internal mechanisms in GitHub that makes that available.
Yeah. Even before it is tagged, when there are commits, it is basically appending some date and some additional stuff at the end of the tag, which is not an official tag, but that is basically how the primary module is going to understand that dependency is and the new kind of updated dependency is.
Yeah. I mean, we only used semver, like just the 3-digit simple semver when we wanted to release a module name. I mean, so we didn't. We had -dev when as a signal to the CI script not to tag that version, and then when it when the script saw a change going from -dev to not having any postfix, that was the version that it would tag. So we didn't get into complicated, sub tags with like alpha or beta or anything like that.
Okay, thanks.
Right. Let's move on. Mark, can we do the next one in just 5 minutes or less?
Yeah, so basically I've been having a lot of difficulty getting DPDK repeatedly done. If we set things up in AWS, it seems to work just fine. But when I go to repeat it on either physical hardware with SRIOV cards or VM on the hardware, I am often ending up with the same problem where the UP4 script just doesn't complete, and I run out of places to look for more information. And so I basically was coming here going, okay, has anybody seen this before? Do they know what I'm talking about? Is there some place I can go for further help, or should I open a bug?
Oh, okay. Can you provide a little bit more details on the setup? We have seen some similar issue, but I'm not sure whether that is the same thing that you're facing here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then in the interest of time, is it okay if I reach out to you on Slack?
Sure.
Yeah, because I don't necessarily want to take up time away from QA, and we spend a lot of time on this here. So thank you. That would be great.
Okay.
Thanks. And just another, and I can follow up as well. You have seen the Yunson's documentation on setting SRIOV up and DPDK?
Yes, I have. Sorry,
that's good.
Jens, no, sorry. I've seen 2 posts in the wiki or in the markdown in the repository for OMAC UPF.
Okay, I will follow up also with another possible link for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I would add that you run into dead ends everywhere. We played with DPDK a little early on in our implementation too, so we might have some information if you run into a dead end.
Awesome. That was Scott, was it?
No, Dan Rittenhouse over at Khajiit.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you.
Great. And report back on what you learn on this one.
I absolutely will do so.
All right, thank you. So now we have the QA update, and Kunal, if you'd like to take it from here.
Sure, Larry. So we for the first point where we are creating a more exhaustive test for GNB sim. So I have created a new integration test where I have added some basic tests where only a few around 7 profiles we are testing with 3 UVs for now, and there we have I have added a few validations if we to see if GNV sim test gets passed. And also I'm working on a new framework. So it's basically a similar framework that we have created for AIAB. So for on-ramp also, I am creating a similar framework where 33 out of around 57 test cases are done. And yeah, this is a robot framework. So here we are using robot for with Python. So yeah.
What's TCs?
Moving on to our first UV. Yeah.
I'm just sorry, what's TCs?
Test cases.
Test cases. I'm sorry, just, thanks.
Yeah. Yep. So moving on to first UV failure issue that we were seeing, and I think the last TST we discussed about it, and so Gabriel suggested to use local SD core. So I just want to confirm if should we go with this approach, or should we wait for the new release or maybe a new Helm chart?
I think we decided just to wait for the new release. I have posted a note on this, so if anyone in the future trips over it, they will have an answer, but, yeah, I mean, I'm a little hesitant to go back in and hand code the, and// hard code that updated container and all the source code for on-ramp. So the fix, the update, so the report here is the updated, I forgot now, which container was it? Which function? Oh, it was
Web
Web UI.
Yeah.
So the updated Web UI container works. Note, I'm going to call it a release note, has been posted, and we're waiting for release instead of patching. So I think that one's a settled issue for right now.
Sure. So just an update that even after using the new Web UI image, we were seeing this issue. So that is
you still
when
saw it?
yeah.
Okay, that's news.
So
I thought the
Gabriel
new Web
suggested
UI container worked.
Yeah, it worked for initial 2-3 runs, and then it started showing up that similar error, and that is when we discussed that um, there might be some compatibility issues because the Helm chart we were using was an older one, and we are using it with new Web UI image. So that's when Gabriel suggested that he's using a local chart, and there the issue never reoccurred. So
Yeah, so this even more strongly suggests we need to wait for a full release. And it also gets back to the whole issue of having bug fixes in releases so that we can track these improvements without having to go to the next release, but that's still not settled, so. Okay, and Scott, could you mute?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I have a question for a QA section here. I've discovered that the maximum bit rate that's being sent to the radio on PDU session setup doesn't change when you do a configuration change. So I can go ahead and change the maximum bit rate up or down, and the UE upon session reestablishment, the UPF will pick up the new rate. But essentially, the very first value that you ever set when creating the network slice is what's always going to be set to the G node B. So my question is, for future meetings, do I go ahead and put that into the QA section, or is QA dedicated for specific people?
Yeah, I would treat that as a separate issue. I think it's effectively it's a functionality issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Okay, so do we know, should I open that in the SMF, or where should I open this as a bug so that I can get a nice, I can provide all the logs and details and PCAPs and good stuff?
Well, I would defer to AJ where he would most like to see that one show up, but it's not here.
Yeah.
It sounds like an SMF problem, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, we can always close it and move it to another if it's not the right place then.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a good problem to raise.
Okay. So action item, mark to open a bug or an issue.
Thank you. All right. Back to UE ransom.
Yeah. So UV ransom data interface connection issue we have discussed it earlier as well. So we know that earlier the GNB SIM used to have two different interface. So one for the data and one for the control, right? So for UV ransom, but that is something you can say a limitation that UV ransom right now has only one interface. So would you I was just thinking about what community think about should we go with multiple interfaces and fix this issue, or should
my apologies. I didn't quite understand what you're saying. Are you talking about the UE ransom's G node B or UE?
So right now I'll just give you a brief intro about this issue that we are discussing. Yeah. So what currently the UE ransom is integrated with on-ramp, and we are using a separate Docker container for this. So earlier the GNB SIM used to be a part of Kubernetes cluster, the existing Kubernetes cluster. So the UE ransom and the current GNB SIM also has a separate Docker container. So this container has only one host interface, and the same interface is used for control and data plane.
Okay, so it's a container.
So that is,
yeah, because I know that the G node
and what
binary
happens is
itself can you separate out the control plane and the data plane. So essentially, what you're saying is you need something like Multus there so that you can have separate control and data plane, or we've got to merge the two of them together.
right.
Sorry,
So right now GNB SIM does not
lost
have a tunnel interface. Sorry. Please
Someone
go
else
ahead,
was typing in with something there.
Yeah, so what I'm get confusing here, I'm not sure why you need why there is a problem having a single interface with UE run SIM. That is how I typically use. I mean, not in a containerized environment, but in running on the host is just basically using the same interface for both.
Yeah, why is that a problem? So there's two questions here. One, is this really a problem, or why is it a problem? And the second one is, if it is a problem, is it strictly due to the containerization of it?
Yeah. So UV ransom creates a different tunnel interface, uh, which is not the case with GNB SIM right now. I think that is in the plan that there would be a separate tunnel interface, and this tunnel interface gets created once the UE gets attached to the core. So data has
Well,
to
this
go
is
through
this
this
is
tunnel
something that's
interface
that's
and
just
create a
extremely
tunnel.
difficult to debug in a call like this. So,
Right.
if anyone has any insights that are helpful here, please forward them. The only other suggestion I would have is to ask the question of, is this unique to our trying to run UE ransom in a container? If you ran it as a process on the server, would the problem go away? Because that is how it is run in other
I
settings.
haven't run it, inside Docker, but running the host, I have never had these kind of issues. It's just using a single interface and everything works fine. And that's what
I can echo that. I've run it both using cupped principles and none, all on the same interface. So I guess the question is there an error that is happening? Can we describe what exactly the problem is? Like what is happening when you run it inside the container?
So the packet does not generate from the tunnel interface itself.
Okay, so the tunnel interface, when you generate a packet on the tunnel interface, it's not actually routing through the UE binary to the gnode B binary to your UPF.
Right.
Because UE ransom is two processes, right? You've got to make sure that both the radio and the UE are running. The fact that you have the UE interface up means that both of them are. But when you're doing a ping-I of that particular interface, that's where you're losing packets.
Yeah. So both the services gets up and GNB SIM, gnode B comes up first, and then once the UE gets attached,
yep,
via that GNB, the tunnel interface comes up.
Correct.
Yeah. And now that tunnel interface, is that actually exposed on the host, or is that visible inside the container namespace only?
Inside the container namespace.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have done a separate POC where we have run this UE ransom on a separate machine itself, and on that VM it was not containerized, so that there it works fine because this virtual interface automatically gets created, and that tunnel interface acts as a virtual interface of
Correct.
So since we're at the top of the hour, why don't we try the following? If you can propose a way to do this without it being containerized that we can make work. It seems to me that the containers might be complicating this. And others have certainly gotten it running directly on the host. So if you could propose a way to do that without containerizing, so there's no law that says it has to be done the same way the GNB SIM was. It just seemed like a reasonable pattern.
But alternatively, what you can take a look at the source code and see where the tunnel is being created, and from there you can see the rest of the steps for the process to better understand what exactly is happening in there.
Right. So they are using, I
Additionally,
think, IOCTM.
additionally, you should be able to do a TCP dump and see the GTP traffic. Make sure that it's not being dropped, or that there's some sort of misconfiguration in the best routes or something like that. Capture on the access and capture on the core, and see what sort of GTP packets are going back and forth.
Sure.
But if the tunnel is not even created, that means that the UE is not even establishing a control plane connection, or does it establish already control plane connection?
Okay, sorry, my apologies. I thought the tunnel interface actually came up.
Yeah, it comes up. Yeah.
Okay, so the tunnel interface is up. It's just when it goes to pass traffic through the tunnel interface, it gets dropped somewhere.
Yeah, we do not see anything going outside from this tunnel interface itself. So
Okay.
maybe.
Yeah. So PCAPs would be something useful to see on the access and core side of the UPF.
Sure, I'll take them and we'll discuss over the Slack. Will it be fine?
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'll ping you separate.
All right, thank you. Hopefully we can get past this one. All right, just making sure everyone got a little assignment here. I think we're now at the top of the hour and through the agenda, so let's call this one a day. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
And goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Everyone.
Bye, everybody.